Good morning and welcome to Church Talk. Bill and Chris is not here this week. Today we're doing the second half of a two-part series on how churches grow then and now. And last week, you may remember, we left off with what it looked like to grow a church in 1955. And today we're going to do some broad strokes to look at how churches in the 21st century grow. What does it take? The reality is that the majority of churches in the United States, the vast majority, very little has changed in the way church is done since 1955. Now, okay, churches today tend to be a little less formal, or maybe a lot less formal, especially when it comes to dress. Once upon a time, wearing jeans to church was a no-no for anyone. Women were expected to, dress up in a dress. Guys were expected to wear a coat and tie, etc., etc. Yeah, not so much anymore. Second, many churches have added screen technology. They have the big screen up there, the televisions, but in most cases, it's nearly always 100% text-based, so it really is nothing more than the extension of a bulletin and the hymnal up on the screen. So, not really much of a step forward, but most churches today have public address systems, the amplified sound that they give so that people can hear. Most churches have an improved comfort level for their members. We now see a lot more padded pews than we used to see, or pews that have been replaced by rather comfortable chairs. And there's air conditioning and heating that doesn't have to be stoked with coal in the sanctuary anymore. But if you think about it, the music, the instruments, the sermon, the order of service, the structures and organization of the congregation, and the work of the pastor in most churches has changed very little since 1955. Another reality that we need to be aware of is that the way churches grow back then, biological church growth, remember people had babies, it really isn't a viable option for the church today. For one, the approximate average age of the church members today is about, in the United States, is about 60-ish. And let's be honest, there's very few grandparents willing to start having babies. Really, not likely to happen. So that's part of it. Plus, the birth rate in the United States is at a historically low rate. It's lower than it has been in decades, maybe ever, actually. It's very, very low. Upwards of 60% of the kids who were raised in the church today, they don't come back, ever. They leave the church and they don't return. So it means that only 40% come. That's a minority. And so the church isn't going to grow that way either, because even if you have biological growth, the majority are leaving. And of the few who remain, who come back, that 40%, the reality is very few of them are brand loyal. They don't really care what brand they were raised in. Oh, there's a few, don't get me wrong, but by and large, when they go off to school or move out of the community, they'll go to whatever church most resonates with them or has their friends, etc. All that's to say that the church of today doesn't, won't, and can't grow using the same methods used in 1955. And yet, churches continue to think that what worked then ought to work now. We just need to work harder at it, and that's not the case. So, how churches grow today? Again, the graphic you can get on Pinterest, and here it is right there. But you can take a look at it on Pinterest. The reality is today that the churches that are growing, they grow in a lot of different ways. There's no one way that the churches are growing. But for churches under 350, and that's the vast majority of churches in the United States, there are some common practices that we find that we're going to use to paint a broad stroke of how you can grow your church today. And we're going to use a presupposition in this episode that a church wants to grow by reaching young families. Because let's be honest, every church wants to reach young families because they come with kids and youth and hopefully will hang around. So, how do churches in the 21st century grow? Well, First, you got to get your hospitality for young families in place. And that begins typically with having a nursery, a guest-friendly nursery where a parent is willing to drop off their children. I've been in a lot of churches recently that had nurseries, and the sanctuary was filled with parents with children, and they're trying to keep their children quiet and occupied. And when you ask why they don't leave their kids in the nursery, there's always the excuse, well, we want our children in with us. And yet, after a consultation with these churches, and they take their nurseries and turn them into guest-friendly nurseries, you come back 6 months later, and there's very few, if any, young ones in the sanctuary because, well, now the nursery is a safe place to drop off the kids. It's a place where the kid can, it will be nurtured and loved, and will be safe in an environment that is, with a steady staff that they can build relationships with, and so on. So, a good nursery, a guest-friendly nursery is the place to start. But equally important is that you need to either tweak your current worship service or start a new worship service that is indigenous to the young adults that you're trying to reach. Now, indigenous doesn't mean that you have to flush all your traditional songs necessarily, because that's not the only thing that indigenous implies, although it could be helpful if we had the music that they hum when they're out in the community and so on. But what really counts is a sermon relevant to their lives and their understanding of, or maybe they have virtually no understanding of Scripture. They have no understanding of what it means to be a Christian. And the Christians they've known, well, let's be honest, it's not necessarily a good thing. So there's the sermons are relevant, and there's an intentionality by the congregation to include them completely. They're not, and they're singing songs that may be the oldies, but they're the oldies that are most likely heard on, old John Wayne show or something. All right, so get your hospitality ready. Hospitality for the little ones, and hospitality for the young adults when they come. That's the first. The second thing that happens in churches that are growing today is that the pastor gets free of most administrative and member care responsibilities. All that stuff that used to make churches grow in 1955, they pretty much divest themselves of, so that they can spend at least, not up to, but at least 50% of their paid time networking with those who are unchurched in your target. In other words, the young adults in this example. 50%. The church gives them permission and removes enough off of them so that they can spend at least half their time out of the church building, reaching, meeting, networking with people who are their target, not their members. The third piece is the pastor actually has to do that. There's been a number of churches that I've worked with that have given the pastor permission, they've removed the burden and all that, and then the pastor doesn't really know what to do and doesn't really feel comfortable doing the getting out and network. They need to be spending their time doing and trying to reach what we call the 5-a-day ideal, meeting 5 new people every single day, and new people they've never met before, and getting contact information, exchanging contact information, not just handing them a card, but also having conversation, getting to know them a little bit. Now, it's an ideal. Even most church planters that I know don't reach the ideal consistently. But if your pastor, or you as the pastor, met 3 new people every single day who are could potentially meet and be a part of your target audience, your church will start to grow, period. Because some of those people will be attracted by the conversation you have, and they will show up. Maybe not immediately, but as you meet them and continue to nurture the relationship. So they have to intensely spend, the pastor must actually spend 25 to 30 hours a week minimum depending on whether they're working a 50 or 60-hour work week, spending half that time actually doing the networking. The fourth piece is the congregation has to be intentional in adopting the people the pastor helps bring into the church, because the pastor can't do it all. The pastor can't assimilate them and bring them in all at the same time very effectively, not for more than 2 or 3 people. And so the congregation has to be intentional in adopting the visitors and helping them become returning guests by gracious hospitality and by including them both in their church circles and their personal circles. In other words, the church member makes room for these people in their lives. They are intentional about not only having a conversation with them, but getting to know them well enough to help them find someone in the congregation who will be a match for friendship and camaraderie, and where they can, feel like they're a part of a growing community. Not just, show up and, hey, can you help us with the fellowship dinner? They actually become involved in people's lives and the life of the church. Then you repeat steps 3, 4, over and over and over again. The pastor networks, the congregation adopts. The pastor networks, the congregation adopts. That's, by and large, how churches grow today. Now, if your primary target happens to be someone besides young adults, for instance, seniors or maybe baby boomers, then you just change up the very first part about getting the church's hospitality up for young adults and the nursery together. You get and put hospitality efforts into creating an environment for your target. So if it's baby boomers, you're working towards, baby boomer kind of music and baby boomer kind of topics and sermons and larger print, up on the screen with some image-driven slides, if you will, or videos, etc. Whatever it is, whoever your target is, number one, you get the hospitality ready for them, and you get your pastor out there networking with that target. That's the primary effective growth practice of the 21st century. And yes, it really is that simple. 5 steps. But it's not easy. You already know that. Otherwise, you'd be doing it. All right. Thanks for joining me. And both Chris and I will see you next week.